The Homeowner Bill of Rights, today on Newsmakers. The bill establishes landmark protections for home loan borrowers, protecting hundreds of thousands of homeowners struggling with payments and loan modifications. But is California leading the nation in relieving the foreclosure crisis?
We have experienced a Titanic of foreclosures that's sinking the economy.
Or will the bill reduce home values and increase foreclosures? Today on this program, Assemblyman Mike Eng of Alhambra, a leader in the legislation, and economist Christopher Thornburg, who predicts the bill will have unintended negative consequences. Good morning, I'm Adrienne Alpert, and it's described as relief for hundreds of thousands of California homeowners facing foreclosure, the Homeowner Bill of Rights. My first guest to discuss the measure, Assemblyman Mike Eng of Alhambra, one of the legislation's co-authors and the co-chair of the Joint Legislative Conference Committee on the Foreclosure Crisis. Welcome, Assemblyman.
Thank you. Good to be here this morning.
2 weeks after the governor signed the landmark protections into law, came news this past week that the California foreclosure crisis seems to be easing. Fewer home loans are entering default. So now that you look at it, was this legislation necessary?
Absolutely. Every economist will tell you that California goes through ups and downs, and a temporary lowering of the foreclosure rate does not mean we're out of the woods yet.
Well, and not every economist would agree, and we do have an economist coming on later in this program who does not agree. And unfortunately, because of scheduling, the two of you couldn't appear together. We should point that out, not because you didn't want to talk together. But let's ask this question. Are nearly 750,000 homes still at risk of foreclosure?
Yes, just to give some perspective, every 13 seconds someone loses their home in America, and about 500 to 1,500 homes a day in California are at risk, and this trend has continued for the last 7 years. And so one slightly improvement in the economy does not necessarily mean that we're out of the woods. In fact, every home is a loss of $50,000 to each bank, $20,000 loss to each local government. We had to act, and we have to act now.
When we talk about the foreclosure crisis and so much of it leading what California's downturn in the economy has been, looking at it from the state and the kind of spending that you're doing at that level, the tax base loss itself, is that what we blame on the San Bernardino, the Stockton bankruptcies or the attempts to go into bankruptcy because of these tax base losses due to foreclosure?
On the day that we voted on the conference committee, Stockton, one of the largest foreclosure epicenters of the United States of America, 300,000 people declare bankruptcy. So we think there's a nexus between those cities that are losing money because of loss of property taxes, increased police and fire protection that they need for these homes that are abandoned, and that's when we had to act. And more cities will be in this horrific Titanic of foreclosures because they're within the vortex that is dragging their economy down. And I unfortunately have to say that if we hadn't acted quicker, if we hadn't acted at this time, we would probably see more foreclosures happening and sinking even more cities that have to resort to bankruptcy.
Let's talk a little bit now about what this does, what this bill of Homeowner Bill of Rights does. It takes effect next January 1st, and it goes into effect for 3 years. Is that correct?
There's varying times that it would go into effect. However, I think the most important takeaway is that this legislation is built on a settlement of 49 states with the 5 largest banks. And we took the best practices in that settlement, $25 billion, $18 billion of which came to California. And we said, if this was something that the 5 banks could agree on, why not, moving forward, have the same benefits for those homeowners that were not included in the settlement? And so that's why we had to adopt, and we had to move on this quickly, because the public already knew the settlement had been in agreement, and the Attorney General of California made it easier for us to see that this would be the time, this would be the moment for California to step up to the plate.
A moment ago, we saw you standing next to Kamala Harris, the State Attorney General. 49 State Attorneys General signed this measure, but there is some indication that California diverted some of that $18 billion into the general fund. It didn't all go into the foreclosure
Yes,
issue?
there's a small amount that was foreseen by the governor as the state's costs for taking care of this settlement in the state of California. But $18 billion is still a very, very large sum of money. And I think the breakdown is something that will really, we need to make sure that homeowners that have lost in the last economic foreclosure downturn take advantage of this, as well as, secondly, moving forward, that homeowners will be protected in the future.
Let's look again at some of the specifics of this measure, because as people sit at home and say, well, what does this mean for me? I'm looking at near foreclosure. It, again, takes effect January 1st, but it could take effect sooner. A bank could choose to adopt some of these policies, correct?
Yes, the good news is that when the settlement started to move forward, many banks already started to adopt these practices. And we just think it makes perfect sense because, number one, it makes the rules of the game of foreclosure a lot more clear. It lessens the liability of those banks that don't want to have to keep settling every 5 or 10 years for billions of dollars, and makes sure that homeowners can stay in their homes. And that's the number one purpose of our legislation. Okay,
establishes a single contact for borrowers. What does that mean?
Yes, we call this the Dr. Spock rule, SPOC. Anyone knows when they call Sears Roebuck about their order, they call an airline to find out what happened to the reservation. There's a single phone number, an individual that has their record, access to perhaps a supervisor to resolve a dispute. And that's all homeowners are asking, is that when they have a problem, they have a single department, someone with knowledge of their case, someone with authority, access to a supervisor if there's a dispute, and that's what a single point of contact is.
Establishes penalties for robo-signing foreclosure documents.
Yes, the robo-signing was not a big issue in California. The big issue is using documents that were unreliable, documents that perhaps did not meet a legal minimum standard for reliability. These documents can no longer be used to foreclose on a property.
Prohibits dual tracking, which means
yes.
Foreclosing at the same time renegotiating the loan. How is that even possible?
Some people call it speaking out of both sides of your mouth. I would like to use an example someone brought to my attention. It's as if you were negotiating at a car dealership for a car with Henry, and all of a sudden Josephine drives the car off the lot and someone else. So what we're eliminating is that you can't be negotiating with the bank on the one hand to perhaps reduce your monthly payments because you lost your job and maybe extend the loan out a few more years. At the same time you're on the phone there, you can't get a Federal Express letter from someone else in the bank that had already worked on your foreclosure papers.
Very quickly, one final word on this part. Renters in foreclosed properties now get 90 days for an eviction notice?
Yes. What it does also is to address the issue of renters, and there's other legislation in the Homeowner Bill of Rights that will specifically take care of them.
All right, Assemblyman Eng, we have a lot more to talk about and what this may mean according to the other side, too. We'll return with Assemblyman Eng right after this.